friends. This is the program Empire of Lies, where we discuss manipulation and disinformation in Russian media. Peace is impossible. Europe is to blame. How Russian TV repackages war and negotiations. In a recent episode of the program 60 Minutes, Olga Skabeeva and her guests demonstrate a technique that has become common on Russian television, reframing the war so that the aggressor appears ready for peace, and Europe appears to be the main obstacle to its advance won. Opening frame, Russia wants peace, but they won't give it Donbas. The segment begins with a quote from US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. In this television universe, he's the head of the State Department. He states the obvious. Russia declares that it wants to keep the remaining part of the Donetsk region, and Ukraine cannot agree to this. Then comes a significant substitution. Rubio. Moscow is making demands that Kyiv cannot accept. Skabeeva immediately translates this into Putin, having failed to obtain consent to hand over Donbas diplomatically, will retake it by force. In other words, Russian military pressure is presented as a natural consequence of Ukraine's stubbornness, not as a continuation of full-scale aggression. This is an important propaganda trick. The starting point is not the invasion itself, but Moscow's fair demands, which are supposedly being ignored. 2. Ukraine as an exhausted victim dependent on the US. Then the Ukrainian envoy to the G7 summit appears on camera. He is quoted in such a way as to create the impression that Kyiv no longer relies on its own army, but is merely asking Washington for help surviving the winter and increasing the cost of war for Putin. This builds a dual narrative. One, Ukraine is energy depleted and lives without power for most of the day. 2. It is completely dependent on American sanctions and aid. Why Ukraine found itself in this situation, Russian strikes on the energy grid, destruction of infrastructure, is not discussed. Blame for the population's suffering is not articulated. Instead, the emphasis is on Kyiv's poor governance, dependence, and inefficiency. American social media is exploding with 2 photographs, purportedly taken by accident last week. A B-52 strategic bomber carrying a prototype of the latest LRSO cruise missile, the Utechka leak nuclear-capable Burevestnik Storm missile, is clearly the Pentagon's response to the Russian Burevestnik Storm missile tests. The new images, taken by aviation photographer Ryan Watamura, show a US Air Force B-52H aircraft flying at low altitude over California, with one external pylon carrying the new AGM-18 1LRSO missile. It is expected to replace the aging AGM-86B air-launched cruise missile, providing US strategic bombers with a long-range, hard-to-detect weapon. When such top-secret objects are discovered in daylight, it's often no coincidence. The fact that the bomber was flying at low altitude in clear weather may indicate the US Air Force's desire for the new missile to be noticed. 3. Sanctions almost exhausted. The West is tired. Russia has adapted. The presenter then relies on Reuters. Russian oil product exports by sea have stabilized, with routes shifted to the Black Sea, the Sea of Azov, the Arctic, and the Far East. Rubio admits that there are almost no targets left for new sanctions. This phrase is used as a key. Sanctions are portrayed as a nearly exhausted tool. Russia is portrayed as a country that has rebuilt its logistics and continues to sell oil despite pressure. As a result, the viewer is told the West is tired, there are no more pressure resources, and Russia has held firm. 4. Nuclear block, B-52 and LRSO leak as a response to Burevestnik. Then the story abruptly shifts to nuclear themes. Random photographs of a B-52 strategic bomber carrying a prototype of the new AGM-181 LRSO cruise missile is shown. This is presented as a discrete demonstration of capabilities, a direct US response to Russia's Burevestnik tests. The idea is simple. Not only is Russia building up its nuclear potential, the US is also actively modernizing its arsenal, supposedly demonstratively. Against this backdrop, possible negotiations on the New START treaty, New START, are discussed. Rubio admits there are no active negotiations. There is only talk about the possibility of negotiations. In the Russian interpretation, this turns into a signal. Washington signals interest. Moscow is ready to talk. But real action is being held up somewhere over there in the West. 5. Europe as a continent preparing for war with Russia. In the final part of the story, Europe is described as a space that is openly preparing for a major war with Russia, is building up arms. Germany, Finland, is weary of Ukraine and is limiting aid. Finland is portrayed as a country literally living in anticipation of conflict. Conscription, bunkers near Helsinki, polls about readiness to take up arms. The chain of meanings is extremely clear. 1. Europe is militarizing and psychologically preparing for war with Russia. 2. Russia is the target of this preparation, not the initiator of aggression. 3. Any defensive measures in the